Good morning, and welcome to this year's Harry Von Smith Lectures. Before we begin, let's take a moment to take care of our phones, to check our phones. Please turn them off or silence them. You won't want to miss a minute of today's lecture by taking a call, nor will you want to be the only one whose phone rings this morning. Thank you. For 30 years now, the Columbus Roberts Department of Religion has hosted these lectures through the generosity of the late Dr. and Mrs. Harry Von Smith, whose gift to the university in 1990 provided the funding for them. Dr. Harry was a 1924 graduate of Mercer, and throughout his life, he held dear this university and the cause of higher education. Almost every year since the beginning of the lectures, the Smith's son, Dr. Patton Smith, and his kind and gracious wife, Virginia, have supported them with their attendance. They are not able to be with us this year, but we are deeply grateful to the Smith family over the generations and up to this moment for their continuing support of these lectures. This year's distinguished visiting professor of religion is Dr. R. Kirby Godsey, Mercer University Chancellor since 2006, upon his retirement as the university's president after 27 years in that office. He is, to date, the longest-serving president in Mercer's history. And I'd be remiss if I didn't pause now to recognize Dr. Godsey's wife, Joan, who is with him and was with him throughout those years as president. Joan is a gifted musician in her own right. She is an inimitable person, a treasure to us all. Thank you for being here. Dr. Godsey's education consists of 5 earned degrees, as you can see in your program, including 2 earned doctorates, one in theology and one in philosophy. He is also the author of 5 books. The first, When We Talk About God, Let's Be Honest. Then The Courage Factor, Centering Our Souls. Is God a Christian? Subtitled, Creating a Community of Conversation. And the last one, but probably not the last one he will write, The God Particle, God Talk in a Big Bang World. The titles suggest not only his broad range of interests, but his deep reflection on big questions. The big questions of God, the universe, and of ourselves in it, and with each other, and with God. And in all of his writings, he has taught us to be honest in our inquiry and curious in our thinking. You can see a list of Dr. Godsey's, some of them, accomplishments, also in your program this morning. And I hope you will recognize their testimony. His energetic and visionary leadership for the cause of Mercer, since he came here in 1977 as Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, is in large part the reason for the unprecedented growth and expansion of the university that were accomplished during his presidency, and upon which his successor has adroitly built, I think. We keep getting better and better all the time. This is a much different place than when I came, and even before then, when Dr. Godsey came. I always think he recognized something about the character of this university and the people who worked here, who had devoted their lives to it, and that in part encouraged his own vision for what we could be. I think as well, for my part, I see in his leadership the same kind of bravery, curiosity, imagination, humanity that he shows in his writing. I think as president, he led us out of those inner strengths of mind and heart and spirit. I always thought that he, and I may be romantic or naive or idealistic or right in saying this, he taught me in a course in higher education before I ever came to Mercer about constituencies, the different voices competing and often competing, but the different kinds of voices that support a university. And he talked about listening to them, but also listening to them, speaking with them, working out of a sense of who you were. And I always think that that's what he showed in his leadership. How many constituencies came and said, can you provide this education program for us? Can you open a school for us? And in every instance, when he said yes, it seems to me that he understood that there was something about Mercer that offered a different way of education, and that was something, it was a gift, not just for us here at the university, but for the state and the region. At least I hope today you will see something of that kind of imagination and curiosity, fearlessness, bravery, defense of what is good and right and true. You will see that in his lectures this morning, and tonight at 7:30, and again tomorrow at 10:10. And with that, I will turn the program over to Dr. Godsey and invite you to come and speak to us. We will hear you gladly.
Thank you so much, Dee. I remember Dee as a student and was proud that she came to Mercer University. She's made Mercer a better place. And I appreciated me having dinner last evening with Dee and her colleagues. And so I'm grateful to be here. I want to first acknowledge as well the family of Harry Vaughan Smith. I'll talk a few minutes later about Harry. I knew him well. And but Pat and Virginia, I'm so sorry they're not here. I think this may be the first year they have not been able to attend. And I don't know whether any of his children are here. But nevertheless, I want to acknowledge Pat and Virginia and our fond recollection of Harry Vaughan Smith himself. I also want to acknowledge the leadership of Bill Underwood, who came to this university. He came to a good university, but he's made it a far greater university, a far better university. And I, of all people, am grateful for the leadership that he has provided in guiding the good work of Mercer. I want to thank the Department of Religion for inviting me to give these lectures. I couldn't imagine why. Frankly, they would ask me to give these lectures, but when Rick Wilson was the voice of the department asking me to give the lectures, and I said no, but he was relentless, and finally his inquiry outlasted my saying no, and here I am, though a year later than planned. I also want to acknowledge my wife, Joan. Most of my theology I learned from her and her wisdom. She's the wisest person I know, and I appreciate her making the effort to be here during these lectures as well. When I considered giving the 30th anniversary lectures for the Harry Vaughan Smith series, I decided I would offer what I called concluding remarks. I originally had that actually in the title. I took it out. By concluding, I don't mean they're my final words. That would be wishful thinking on your part. I mean rather conclusions. By conclude, I mean that if I could identify three reference points that would indicate the outcome of my religious and theological and philosophical beliefs and thoughts, what would they be? So these lectures reflect how my mind has settled on interpreting the nature of the world and our place in it. It's important that our minds settle, but it's not important that they stay settled. You need to have a place to stand, but that place will change. I, like Bertrand Russell, find myself open to changing my mind as I move ahead. But the first lecture will be about the nature of reality. The one this morning is the world made up of substances such as quarks and galaxies and atoms and protons, or is field, F-I-E-L-D, is field a better, more accurate way of describing what actually exists in the world? I happen to believe that the concept of field holds more promise both in science and religion. While I'm not a scientist, I've been influenced by the history of science and the philosophy of science, and it's become clear to me that science is by no means the enemy of belief, and religion should not seek to diminish the powerful and important contributions of science. The second lecture discusses the nature of God. The question of God sort of bubbles up within us as people living on the boundary between life and death. We can speak of God only through symbol and ritual, through myth and metaphor. All our explorations of the galaxies with our probes and our telescopes are not likely to find the existence of God. I believe that's because God does not exist as a thing or a person in the world. And the naming of God refers to the reality that is prior to and makes possible everything that exists. The third lecture tomorrow evening speaks of grace as the ultimate character of the universe as it pertains to human experience. That suggests that grace is not simply a way of behaving. It is the experiential reality of God's presence among us, in so much as we become people of grace, people for whom grace breaks through. God creates and redeems the world through us. I approach these lectures as a lover of metaphysics who holds high the power of faith and the influences of the great religions of the world to help us in our search for knowledge and understanding. Faith is never the enemy of reason. We need the inquiries of science, the creativity of writers, the insight of poets and artists. We need the discoveries of Newton and Einstein, the challenges of Hegel and Whitehead, the inspiration of Maya Angelou, and our own Anya Silver. We need all of these resources if we're to find our way through the uncertain maze of our human condition. To you who are students here, I want to add that most importantly, we need the new ideas that you will create, you'll think up, the breakthroughs that you will make, the caring hands and hearts who will lift people up who have felt beaten down. There are novels yet to be written. There's music yet to be composed. There are stories yet to be written, discoveries yet to be made. Your presence and our learning together is the only avenue toward finding the wisdom that will sustain us as a human species. One final word of introduction. At the close of each lecture, I've decided to speak very briefly about how these words bear upon the living of our lives. That is, what are some of the practical implications that might flow from what I have been saying. I'm adding this commentary specifically as a tribute to Harry Vaughan Smith. I knew Harry well. We talked and laughed together. He was a gentleman of generous goodwill and good humor. When I think of Harry's life, I think of a life marked by loving and laughter. He made people better by his presence. Above all else, he was down to earth, very plain spoken. Therefore, it seemed appropriate to me to conclude each lecture with a comment about how these lectures might bear on our daily lives. First lecture is entitled The Fabric of the Unknown. In examining the fabric of the universe, I am speaking metaphorically about the fibers that account for everything that exists. All human inquiries face into a sea of mystery. We should understand that we're not outside that mystery. The unknown dwells within us and all about us. There are two kinds of mystery. One refers to the not yet known. Exploring the not yet known is chiefly the territory of scientific inquiry, of historical research, of social research. We're continually pushing back the boundaries of the not yet known. We're building an ever-enlarging Wikipedia of facts. Your being here at Mercer is one of those facts. We are all matters of fact. In gathering facts about the world, we still have a mighty long way to go. We're barely in the crawling stage. Even so, we've learned more in the last 100 years than was learned in all of human history before. But one pressing question that takes on more urgency every day is whether we have learned enough or have become civilized enough to save us from ourselves. The answer is by no means clear. Our existence is fragile. I agree with Stephen Hawking that it is possible that human beings, by their actions or inactions, may make themselves extinct. We're in a kind of race to learn enough, but even more, to become civilized enough to curb our destructive ways. Pushing the boundaries of the not yet known is part of the answer. But knowledge alone may not be enough to save us. The question of our survival may not simply be about whether we know enough. It may be about whether we are good enough. Perhaps the advance of artificial intelligence, which is moving forward with ever-quickening momentum, will bring us to a new stage of human evolution, helping to rescue us, maybe, from our irrational ways. I'm among those who see artificial intelligence not as a threat, but as the advent of a potentially new stage of human evolution. Our present stage is rapidly running out of time. And the not yet known composes about 95% of the entire universe, over 95%. So I believe that the convergence of the human mind and the human machine are likely to be transformative for the 21st century. Second kind of mystery was posed by Martin Heidegger, by Leibniz, is this: why is there something rather than nothing? Well, the question of why there's something rather than nothing is not strictly a scientific question. It is a metaphysical question, perhaps a religious or theological question. Poets and artists, preachers and prophets may be more eloquently speaking about this mystery than all our prose. Facing into the unknown, here is where we begin. From our human perch, we find ourselves on a small planet in an elliptical orbit around a smallish star called our sun, on the outer realms of a spiraling galaxy spiraling around a massive black hole. We affectionately call this galaxy the Milky Way. Our sun is one of billions of stars in the Milky Way, and which itself exists among billions of galaxies and quadrillions of stars. Looking into this vastness, we have discovered, first of all, that things are not what they appear. We observe that things that range from planets and moons and tables and chairs to puppies and people, we've learned that these things are also made up of things like atoms and molecules. We can thank Democritus for that. He lived more than 400 years before Jesus. And though he was wrong about the specific particles, he was right about the idea. He was the first to offer an atomic theory of the universe. Actually, scientists today account for all physical existence with a number of small ingredients, two kinds of things, two kinds of particles in the world. They call one of them fermions and the other bosons. Now, you may not have heard of either one. Fermions are things like electrons and protons and quarks. In other words, elementary particles. And bosons are such things as gravitons and photons and gluons. In other words, elementary forces. So the world is made up of particles and forces, and the forces are called particles as well. For example, a packet of light is called a photon. Elements of gravity are called gravitons. As we've looked more closely at the particles, they turn out not to be things, entities, at all. They are best described as fields. In the words of Sean Carroll, he's a professor of physics at Caltech, every particle is a field of one kind or another. What we call particles are just what we see when we look at a field. We extrapolate a particle from the field. So a proton is not a thing. It is more like an activity or an event. So the world turns out to be made up of particle fields and force fields. Getting to the nub of the matter, everything we know, including you and me, are fields of being. There's no solid stuff. Everything is made up of fields. There are no unrelated substances freestanding. There are no objects floating about out there in the world. There are no entities. We call this thing from which I'm speaking a pulpit or a lectern, but it turns out that it is not a substantial thing. It only appears to be solid. In reality, we know it's really a teeming mass of activity here. As one scientist observed, particles are simply a convenient fiction. Therefore, the world is made up of two kinds of fields: matter fields and force fields, or energy fields. These fields are completely interchangeable. One can be converted into the other. That's the meaning of Einstein's famous formula, E equals mc squared. That simple formula not only changed a lot of human thinking and a lot of human inquiry, but it changed geopolitical history. We might think of matter, such as this, as congealed or captured energy. I'll speak about individuality later, but let me say here that individuals such as you and I are also fields. The notion of a lone, solitary, unrelated individual is also pure fiction. Fields, not substances, then in my view, constitute the fabric of the universe. By field, I mean a constellation of relatedness, or if I may coin a word, relationality, or relativity, meaning that nothing can be understood except in relation to another. Everything is related. And your relatedness is prior to your appearing as an object. And relatedness is prior to your existing as a solitary individual. By their nature, fields are not discrete. They're spread out. You and I are also spread out. What you see when you are looking at one another is a field of relatedness. Think of the intrinsic connectedness that constitutes your life. When I look at you, I do not see most of the relatedness that constitutes and makes you who you are. You're not an isolated object. You and I are like vibrations in a field of being. I believe that to be both scientific fact and religious truth. Whether a proton or a person, you're an episode or an extrapolation from your fieldness. Outside the field, your existence collapses. There are no freestanding, unrelated objects. There's a field of being we call a star. There's a field of being we call an atom. There's a field of being we call an electron. There's a field of being we call a person. Now, fieldness is our best scientific metaphor, and fieldness is also a rich metaphor for understanding our own lives. It points us toward our universal interrelatedness as the reality that underlies all that exists. You cannot unravel your existence from everything else in the world. Everything is intimately and ultimately connected. The idea that you could use or abuse another person, or use or abuse the good earth on which we live, is both bad science and bad religion. The origins of every field that exists, the atoms and the stars, you and me, comes from what the scientists like to call the Big Bang. Christians and Jews and other religious groups prefer to refer to this event as creation. Well, the Big Bang is scientific myth. The early stories of Genesis are religious myth. I find the early stories of Genesis to be more insightful for me, more fulfilling, more revealing than the stories of the Big Bang. The notion of the Big Bang is just a placeholder in science for the inexplicable. Question arises, of course, what existed before the Big Bang? What existed before creation? And the answer is nothing. No thing. No thing existed. All that exists springs from primordial reality, which simply is. Primordial being is not spatial or temporal. Space did not exist. Time did not exist. The properties of space and time are ways of expressing relationships between entities, particles. They are nothing in themselves. Time and space are not vessels in which we exist. They are ways of describing our relatedness. Primordial reality, primordial being, or what Paul Tillich called being itself, does not exist in time and space. I think of it belonging to the literal meaning of eternal. The eternal has nothing to do with everlasting. Eternity is not lots of time. It is being beyond the existence of time and space. An important truth here, perhaps, all that is, always was, and always will be. We should understand that the was and the will be are not features of primordial being. Time and space, past and future, are characteristics of existence. In primordial being, there is no past or future, no before or after. All that exists, including time and space, matter fields and energy fields, spring from primordial being, which is not subject to the frailties of existence. Particles come in and out of existence. Forces come in and out. They come and go. You and I come and go as well. It is a mistake to measure our lives by calendars and clocks. They turn out to be paltry measures. Your being that exists in a frame of years cannot be defined by the calendar. Being born and dying does not exhaust the meaning of your being here. You were before you were born, and I believe the eternality of being means that your being will not be erased by the ending of time. We human beings, of course, are recent newcomers to our universe. The broad consensus is that the universe in which we live came into existence about 13.8 billion years ago, as we measure time. We have achieved sufficient intelligence and advanced technologies to hear the vibrations of the near origins of the universe in which we reside. We have learned that we belong to an ever-expanding world that existed about 10 billion years before Earth even came along. Earth is formed out of stardust, the dust from other stars. So are you and I are formed of stardust as well. As at the earliest, humankind has been on the scene for 300,000 or 400,000 years, maybe less. And about 12 to 15 years, human civilization has arisen. A fleeting whisper in the story of the universe. From time to time, we run into people who say and actually believe the universe is about 6,000 years old. Well, that may be a tentative belief, but it's not a tentative fact. We have enough alternative facts, probably. We don't need to create a lot more. Creationism is not science, and should not be treated as science. It has no credible standing in trying to make sense of our actual presence in the world. We certainly don't need it to make sense of our faith. Making facts out of non-facts makes faith less compelling. Creationists wind up distorting our understanding of God and betraying history. Parenthetically, let me add that ignorance is never a solid, sound foundation for building a strong faith. Let me underscore, lest we get puffed up, that ignorant believers are surely as important and valued as the most educated ones. But making ignorance a tenet of belief does not make it less ignorant. Holy ignorance is still ignorance. Closer to home, it often takes a lifetime, maybe more, to come to grips with our essential connectedness with one another. Our lives and the life of our home planet are inextricably interwoven. We're prone to place our individuality, our independent and freestanding above our connectedness. We belong to a field of existence been given a name. It's like an electron. We give it a name, but it's not a thing. It is a vibration in the electric field. You and I are moments of light and creativity in the field of existence. The reality does not diminish our individuality. Every person is a singular event of creation. You are a heartbeat that has never beat before. But the notion that we are independent and self-sufficient should be set aside. Still closer to home, we human beings are sometimes frustrated and threatened by the boundaries that limit us. We prefer to live without limits. We prefer to live on our own terms, dismissing the relatedness without which we do not even exist. We can become enamored by the illusions of control. The boundary of death is a jolt to that illusion. I want to address the matter of death in a later lecture. I say only now that death does feel like a final frontier. I mean, a point of no return toward which we are all hurtling. Think for a moment about how much of our lives is beyond our control. Birth is beyond our control. No one asked to be born. Color is beyond our control. Gender is beyond our control. We're confronted with hurricanes and tornadoes, with floods and earthquakes, all beyond our control. We live on a planet that is dodging a cloud of asteroids, many of which could destroy any trace of humankind. Viruses and germs have proven themselves to be more powerful than we. We try to anticipate and predict events in time to prepare for their wrath. Over and over again, we find ourselves crawling out of episodes of human wreckage completely beyond our control. Regardless of our pretense, control is elusive. That elusiveness is nowhere more evident than the inner sanctum of another person. In our daily lives, we're confronted and sometimes enraged by the mystery, by the inability to control another person. Shrouding every person is a veil of the unknown. We cannot know what is in their mind, much less the heart of another person. Sometimes we're uneasy around strangers or people from different cultures, people from different background, different beliefs, different color. It is as if people who seem strange or outside our control or our ability to keep them in place feel a bit dangerous. We prefer those who fit in. The inability to control the thought and actions of others can create an interference that on occasions can lead to terrible human abuse. In human history, we have repeatedly turned people into objects, not related, objects to be used, even bought and sold, used and discarded in such episodes of slavery and human trafficking. Seeking control is rampant. Let us count the ways: marital control, political control, financial control, mind control, emotional control, physical control, sexual control. The list is long. Actually, naming things is a manner of taking control. Naming is quintessentially a human act. When we name something, we noun it. A noun denotes an object. Giving something a name is a means of circumscribing it, of nailing it down. We give children names, but it's hard to corral them within our boundaries. That's because you and I are more than the names that designate us. Essentially, you are not a noun. Your life and mine is actually more like a verb than a noun. You're more like a happening, an event, than an object that can be kept in place. I think of every person as a mystical event in the world. Your being here is a new star in the heavens. We all belong to that universal fabric that makes everything and everyone possible. That reality, if we're able to imagine it, alters how we engage each other. When we look at each other, in each case, we're observing what I call a region of behavior, an event field, which we've named and given a Social Security name, but that identity is also a convenient fiction. You're far more than your name. You're far more than I see. When I see you, I'm pulling you out of all your relationships, most of which I do not know, but which constitute the fabric of your being. You are not an object. You're a field of connectivity, and that connectedness defines who you are and makes you the unique person that you become. Our lives are irrevocably interconnected. We are all cousins at heart. We may pretend that our interconnected lives do not matter. Radically uncoupling our lives always leads toward brokenness. It is a crippling state of affairs. When we consider human civilization, we must say that we're yet in the early, maybe barbarian stages of human development. We still try to solve our conflicts by resorting to violence and wars, such as Ukraine today and Iraq yesterday. We use people and discard them like broken toys. Surely, we're yet in the infancy of human evolution. The more civilized truth is each of you is my closest encounter to the ultimate mystery of the universe. When you meet one another, you're as close to the mystery as you will ever come. You are the mystery of God made flesh. In you, I can see and touch the experience the mystery up close. Every one of us is a distinct incarnation of ultimate creativity, primordial reality that is the fabric of the unknown. You are pure connectivity, and apart from that reality, you do not exist at all. You are a new episode in the field of being. You are like a bubble in the fabric of universal being that has never bubbled up before. Each person I view as a surge of creativity, a brief burst of light, illuminating what has never been seen. You are a unique presence, like a star being born. You can see what has never been seen. You can imagine what has never been imagined. You can dream what has never been dreamed. You can do what has never been done. You can be what has never been. When you were born, God said, "Let there be light." Your presence is a sacred event that has never happened before. Our high calling, I believe, is to live toward our sacredness, to live toward the light embodied in each of us, to embrace our essential connectedness with one another. In doing so, we make our world a better place. If we try to live as independent, autonomous individuals, treating the natural world, including our good earth, or other persons as objects to be used, our existence becomes destructive and tragic, contributing to the darkness. In summary, my view of metaphysics is that the nature of reality is relational, not substantive. There are no things. You are not an object. Those matters which we refer to as objects are actually episodes of relatedness. I believe that this view of metaphysics is both more compatible with our finding in the sciences, and this view also provides a better way of understanding our notions of God and our place in the world. Relationality is a powerful idea, not only in physics and biology, but also in coming to terms with our own presence here. The facts of our lives are surely important for the living of our days. There is, however, a transcendent reality embedded within each of us with which we need to get in touch. Embrace your sacredness. The sacred moment rises in discovering that you are not alone. Yes, the trees and the animals. Think Albert Schweitzer's reverence for life. My well-being is intimately tied to your well-being. Your being born makes the world a slightly different and potentially a better place. You and I bear the mark of eternity within, and the highest calling is to embrace our profound interconnectedness with each other and all that exists in the world. In doing so, we become a part of the creative force, the creative energy that broods over the broken places. We, alongside God, become creators of a new day. Every person is born to be a particle of light in the fabric of the universe. As promised, I offer a closing remark as a tribute to Harry. If we begin to take seriously that all our human lives are interdependent, it will radically change our behavior. Every person is your brother or your sister. Apart from your relatedness, you have no life at all. Behaving as an arrogant, independent person is living in pure illusion. Putting other people down or abusing them either emotionally or physically withers your own life. It dims the light of your presence. The advance of our civilization and the pathway to finding inner peace requires that we embrace the value of each other and the sacredness of the world in which we live. If we are to build scaffolds of peace and hope, we must see in each other the breaking of the light of God. Our souls are intertwined. Our futures are interwoven. We must not only learn to live with one another. The redeeming truth is we must learn to live for one another. Thank you very much.